Welcome to another episode of the Connected Lawyer podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I am Bryan. Aaron, I know last episode we just talked about LastPass, and I saw recently that LastPass just posted an update uh, telling us sort of what they've learned and what the conclusions are that they've drawn from their data breaches. Can you tell us what they told us?
Well, I can tell you what I think they told us, and I have read the update. And so, specifically, and everybody that's listening should probably just go to the LastPass blog and follow along with the security incident so you can see. But specifically, what I have in front of me is the March 1st, 2023 update. Okay, and it's called Security Incident Update and Recommended Actions. And we talked about this in the last episode and, kind of had our own take on it, which now I think a lot of that was corroborated. I think, that maybe now that we were reading through the new thoughts from LastPass, I kind of feel like the analysis that we went through was a good one. And so just maybe to recap on that, what we were saying is that best guess between August and December, there was a series of security incidents that took place in the LastPass infrastructure, their technology stack. And best guess, we think that they would have taken a copy of the customer vaults. And by vault, we mean basically a text file, I guess is how I think of it, that inside of which is a list of usernames and not passwords, but hashes of passwords that can be used to get into, different, whatever websites that you have stored in LastPass.
So just in case anyone's forgotten or didn't listen to the prior episode, what do you mean when you say hashes of passwords?
Good question. So, and it's actually something that we should unpack during this episode, because when they say hashes of passwords, so a hash is a digital fingerprint of any sort of electronic data, right? So if you take a phrase like summer 2022, which is your password for LastPass, let's say, and you put
Which
it
is
through,
a terrible password. Let's just be clear
yeah,
about that.
exactly. But let's assume that's what it is, because that's kind of one of the things you have to think about is, did you have a terrible password before this incident happened? So you type in summer 2023, and then when we said in the last episode is that LastPass salts that password. So even if you're picking a terrible password, they add, some kind of extra data to it to kind of beef it up. Okay. So it would be summer 2023 X exclamation point, comma, some kind of, they add something random to it. And then they run that through an algorithm which produces a uniform character set called a hash. And so if it's SHA-256, for example, I think that outputs 64 characters in hexadecimal format is how it's normally viewed. And it doesn't matter if you put in the letter A, it's going to output a 64 character hexadecimal code. If you put in, all of War and Peace, it's going to output a 64 digit hexadecimal code. And the way that SHA-256 works is that for anything you put into it, it will always give you a unique output, which is like the fingerprint of that data. And the reason we call it a fingerprint is that there's no two inputs that can really theoretically, we never say, it's impossible, because it's sort of a feature of galactic probabilities. And it's just, people have been trying and trying and trying to crack this thing, and they never have. And so it is mathematically, scientifically, extremely unlikely to impossible that two different inputs to SHA-256 could create the same output. And that would be called a collision. And if someone anywhere in some math department somewhere at a university found a SHA-256 collision, it would be a major event, front page on, maybe not the regular newspaper, but newspaper that people that care about SHA-256 read. It would be on the front
We
page of
would
that.
hear about it.
Yeah, it'd be on the front page of encryption news, quarterly or
Right.
something like that. It would be a big deal. It'd be like, finding like an important step forward in the cure for cancer, a major mathematical finding that would totally invalidate an entire field of cryptography that we rely on to do a lot of things, like Bitcoin, for example. It would, it would put the entire idea of Bitcoin into jeopardy. So we don't think it's possible, and so your salted password gets hashed, and then importantly for the subject of today, it gets hashed a bunch of times. Okay, a bunch of iterations, and I think the default is 100,100 times. Is how many times the salted password gets hashed. The result of that gets hashed, and that happens 100,001 times. And so importantly, if you read through the March 1st LastPass security update and they give you recommended actions, one of the recommended actions is that you increase the level of iterations for the default setting, so that instead of 100,100 iterations of SHA-256, it is 600,000. So good grief. If that's what we're at the point of, is worrying whether something can sort of reverse engineer its way through 100,000 iterations of SHA-256, that's kind of scary in and of itself, So I don't know if you had a chance to read the update to the point where they start putting out recommendations, and if you've thought about, like have you gone into your instance and made these changes?
Yeah, so I have read it, and I went in and changed that number from 100,100 to something in excess of 600,000. And based on a conversation we had the other day about this, I did not use 600,000 as the number,
Right.
because I presume that's what a lot of people will do, and there has to be some benefit for people who are trying to access your information in knowing how many times this has been hashed. So my number is greater than 600,000, but I won't say how much greater.
Yeah, less than a billion, I would
Yes.
assume. And I guess, and just for listeners, so this is called, I'm just looking through the recommendations right now, and they're not just making this up. And so the recommendation, it says on January 2023, OWASP updated their recommendation for the recommended number of PBK DF2 iterations to 600,000. And then it says, in response, we are raising our default minimum iterations count to 600,000. So if you're getting a new LastPass account, for example, or you're just setting it up out of the box, it's going to be set at 600,000. And so, this is an international standard setting organization, and they're thinking about the increasing power of computers and the advances in quantum computing, the field of quantum computers and how they interplay with cryptography. And they're trying to keep this at a number that is safe to say that there isn't even a theoretically conceivable computer that can hack its way back through that many iterations. Now, to your point, though, setting it at the default of anything sort of gives away a little information that maybe you don't want to. And if we look back through the technical notes for the breach that happened over the course of the summer and fall of last year, one of the things that they got access to was the development environment, as well as some source code about how the production environment works, how the actual live LastPass system works. And so and it turns out that they were storing the PBKDF2 iteration number in clear text, if I'm reading this correctly, so that the hackers are downloading, that information along with your encrypted hash. And so to me, that sort of seems to defeat some of the purpose of the security protocols around setting it at a really high number, because if they know how the salt is computed, and if they know what the specific hashing algorithm is that is used to generate the key that's stored in LastPass, and they know the number of iterations, then they don't really have to do this wild guessing game, right? They're sort of back to a very, very simple brute force problem, because they know for every guess that they make, it has to go through SHA-256, and it has to go through it exactly 100,100 times, or whatever number you have that set to. Now, I couldn't find anything in the incident response notes, in terms of the details about what remediation actions the LastPass organization has taken, but I'd like to find something in there that says that the iteration count is an encrypted piece of data as well, that you wouldn't be able to get when you're downloading somebody's vault, right? I mean that.
Right.
And to your point, when you say you didn't set it at the default number of 600,000, that's exactly what you're trying to do, is make this a number that has some randomization in and of itself, right? So that it isn't part of a pre-patterned attack that you could be a victim to.
Right. Absolutely. And that was sort of the thought behind what I did. Its efficacy, I guess, we'll have to wait and find out. But I think everything that we do to make it more of a guessing game is better. The one thing I sort of found interesting is, and we've sort of talked about this being a data breach, but it really LastPass had two incidents, the incidents that they talked about, and my reading is the first one. It sounds like somebody lost a computer, or it fell into the hands of somebody who shouldn't have had it. And the second one, it sounds like somebody fell for some sort of phishing attack. I mean, LastPass doesn't come right out and say that, but they sort of hint to it obliquely, or at least that's the conclusion I drew from reading their latest update.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, and that's actually a good point. That even if it's the case that we both read the same output from LastPass and come to different conclusions, it's sort of they're sort of wording it obliquely in a way that doesn't really give you a lot of detailed information. On the other hand, I'm not sure you really want them to just dump out a roadmap for how the hack happened and what their
No, yeah, I
weaknesses
understand completely why they're doing this. That they're not just saying, "Here's how all of the information was stolen."
Yeah.
And that second incident, which seems to be the major one here, they talk about some sort of third party application being
Yes.
involved, but they never identify what it was, or what exactly happened there. And I understand. I'm fine with that. From my perspective, I don't need them to tell everybody what happened, because you're right. That just creates a roadmap. Here's a great way to to try to take advantage of some exploits.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where I was going with it too. I think that the first attack was not as bad as the second attack. And the first attack was sort of where they got the reconnaissance in order to conduct the second attack and kind of see, who they needed to be, targeting in terms of the internal people. And so I'm looking at, there is a detail page here where it says incident 2, additional details of the attack. And then they say, despite high confidence in the outcomes of our investigation, et cetera, the threat actor leveraged information stolen during the first incident, information available from a third-party data breach, and a vulnerability in a third-party media software package to launch a coordinated second attack. And so the developer, and I also read somewhere that this was one of 4 people in LastPass that had access to the information in the dev environment where they could download these. This is where they got the customer vaults,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so they've got something on a computer that's third party software. And what's unclear about it is whether this is software that is, kind of authorized and necessary in the normal course of business for LastPass, or if they have people acting in this high level of a capacity that can put things, like video editing software. I read somewhere else that that was an open source video editing software program, and you have to be careful, when you start reading, listening to us, or reading any other
Right.
third party commentator who's kind of speculating on what might have happened. You have to be careful, baking that in. It is speculation, but it makes you wonder, and it also kind of makes you tuned into the idea that if you want to practice in a highly secure environment, that the computer that you're using for that purpose has to have a really tightly, strictly controlled set of software applications that are on it. And so I think, a lot of our listeners are lawyers, solo small firm lawyers. That's who we do a lot of these educational efforts towards. And I think that it's pretty common in solo small firms to have a laptop computer or a desktop computer or whatever that you use for a lot of personal purposes. And you might have the administrative rights to put things on there. And so you might go to, I don't know, ZDNet, or, some of these places where you can download, free applications or trial applications. And this LastPass breach, this is a global, highly sophisticated, well-funded, um, sort of fortress of incredibly secure. These vaults hold military secrets. They hold hospital, healthcare record access. This is some very, very sensitive data. And the idea that somebody could download a third party application that may not have been for a specific business need, and cause a global breach like this is kind of scary. And so for the rest of us, it's sort of like, hey, maybe if you do want to download free software and free trials and things like this, maybe you do need a dev environment, a separate laptop that isn't connected to the rest of your firm's information, and that maybe you run that and you do your research and you do a security risk assessment before you put that software into production. And a highly secure environment would never just let somebody just throw some software on there for a personal need and take that risk. And this is a, I don't know if you want to call it a wake up call, or a what's the word, like a cautionary tale, right? It
Right.
feels like one of those things.
Now, absolutely. And, obviously, we don't know exactly what happened with this person at LastPass and whether the software was authorized to be on their computer or whatever. But it does, I think, just as you mentioned, make us think about that. And, like, you know, to practice law, there's certain software we need installed on our computer. Uh, you know, maybe some word processing, PDF program, something like that. But if there's not a business case for it to be on your computer, I think this is a really strong, as you said, wake up call that, hey, you, you shouldn't just let people in your firm download and install whatever they want on their computers. And two, you really need to think about what software should be on our computers and who's going to have the authority to install that or decide whether that's going to be installed or not. And this sounds like a great place for a checklist. Like, this is the software that can be installed on the
Yeah.
computer, and that's it. No more, no less.
Yeah.
Whatever that is for your particular firm.
And it kind of helps you sort of talk to your vendors as well. And I know, I've implemented, law practice management systems for small law firms several times. And when I'm getting to know a new vendor, it's pretty rare for me to just sort of, read their website and install the software, or to upload the data. I will reach out to people. Sometimes I will go and visit them. We did document management system back in 2013, that's now become a very large document management system in not just the legal industry, but the banking industry. They're a big company, but they were just kind of starting out or really just starting their growth process in 2013. And I remember flying out to to their offices, to their corporate offices in Utah and meeting everybody there. I met the owner, I met all the, the developers, and I talked to them about security and what the protocols are, what their policies are, how they deal with stuff like this. And, I remember, some people kind of talked to me like that was a really sort of extreme thing to do. But, when you look at an incident like LastPass, which again, if there's any company in the world that you would have thought you could just trust to get it right, it would be LastPass. And, so when you're talking about, and I don't care who it is, if you're thinking, well, we're going to onboard Clio, we're going to onboard Recommender, we're going to onboard, these are like trusted names in the industry. It
Right.
still is fair to say, look, what are your policies on, what sort of security framework do you use to keep my data secure? And don't just say, yeah, we stored in Amazon, so everything's fine. Well, no. Look at LastPass. They could say the same thing. In fact, you're looking right here at the security incident number 2, which is the bad one. And it says right here, to access the cloud-based storage resources, notably S3 buckets, which are protected with either AWS, S3, SSE encryption, etc. So they're sort of reciting the common thing that we're used to getting, yada yada from our legal vendors. Well, we use Amazon, so everything's fine. Well, no, there's a lot more to it. Just because your stuff is stored in Amazon doesn't mean that you've got everything configured correctly and that your application is coded and implemented securely, and that your people don't have regular training and policies around them and sanctions to back them up to say, hey, you can't download, random open source video editing software that could have a security hole in it. Because it ended up being a keylogger that grabbed his master password in this case, right out of LastPass. If I'm reading this correctly, right?
Yes, it's very interesting. As with most stuff, when we start talking about security, very scary. Though I will say, I understand the due diligence you did when you flew to Utah, but I think most of us can do our due diligence from where we are. But it does require a couple of things. One, understanding, having some sort of general understanding of how the product works, and then 2, talking with somebody at that vendor who actually knows what they're talking about. And that's probably not the salesperson. It's probably somebody other than the salesperson. And if they want to sell you this, and I can guarantee you they do, whatever product they're selling, they want to sell it to you. They should be able to put you in touch with somebody who can answer your questions and answer some of those questions about how exactly the data is stored, where it's stored, what types of backup systems they have in place. And now with this latest LastPass breach, I think we add to that list of questions. Does your company have a policy prohibiting people from installing software on their computer? Are all of your computers locked down so only the software that the company thinks should be there is there? And I know that can be frustrating for some users. My wife works at a company that does basically insurance, so she has a bunch of access, at least potentially, to PHI, personal health information, and so they're very understandably, her IT department's very concerned about that. So she can't change anything on her computer without them doing it, which, okay, admittedly, that's frustrating whenever, they rebuild her computer and send her home with it, and she can't print to our printer at the house because she doesn't have the permissions to add the printer. But in reality, for the job she has, and quite literally the jobs we have, that's a good thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's good that she needs to get somebody from IT on the phone to log in remotely to her computer and make sure that whatever change she wants to make is um, something that she should be doing. And uh, implementing those sorts of controls, I think, is just one step and one thing that we can do to help keep us and our clients' data more secure.
Yeah. And even that's expensive, coming from the perspective of the IT guy that gets that call in some context of my professional life. It's sort of like, look, I don't have time to install everyone's printer and to field every single application. It is expensive if you want to run a program like that and to deploy the
Right.
people available to do it. So and the other thing that you'll find is that it's not just, I want to install, I don't know, some game from the App Store, or I want to install a home printer because of, it makes my life more convenient. A lot of times these are security updates that require administrative access. And, there isn't any, every time you want to deploy a security incident, you have to get IT. And, this is something that tends to be kind of reserved for larger players that can support an IT staff that does that sort of thing constantly. But smaller organizations can't do that. They have thin margins already.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough. And the other thing that it kind of brings to mind is this idea of kind of different versions of software, which you'll see with LastPass. LastPass has a free version, they have a personal version, they have a family version, and then they have a business version. And one of the things that's in the recommendations that LastPass has put out in this March 1st bulletin was that you enable dark web monitoring, which is not enabled by default. And it previously was not available if you have the free version. That's a paid benefit, and they're changing that now as part of this breach response, or at least the remediation efforts. They're opening that feature up to everybody, but you still have to go in and enable it. And just to explain that, so dark web monitoring means that there are global organizations and security collaborations that are trying to gather as much information as they can about what's happening in the kind of the black hat community. And the way that a lot of these password these credential stuffing attacks work is that once somebody phishes your email, you accidentally put in your username and password into a phishing email and it goes into a database. The database then gets sold and gets distributed and federated, among their, their useful information points. And then you can buy these. You can say, "Here, give me a spreadsheet that has 100,000 usernames and passwords that have been breached." A small fraction of which might be good, because you'd think that most people would have changed the password by the time, the average person bought one of these stolen password sheets. But there's going to be some passwords in there that don't get changed, and there's going to be some value to it. And there's some accounts that lots of people
Right.
are accessing on a regular basis. So the dark web monitoring would also, for good purposes, would gather as many of those databases as they can, and then every email address that you have in LastPass, you can have as many as 100 that get monitored. It will run a scan and see if any of those email addresses appear on one of these. They call them rainbow tables, I guess. Password spray tables that can be used for these credential attacks. And then okay, I've got an account that got breached. And if you use a different password for every single one, you'll be able to drill down and see exactly which one of your vendors was the one that breached you. So that was one thing that I thought was helpful in this remediation effort of theirs, was to open that up to everybody and to advise people to turn on dark web monitoring, which isn't by default. But my point is that the pro version of everything, the business version of everything, contains representations and warranties that you benefit from by paying a little bit more and becoming a business customer. And those representations and warranties are backed by audits that the bigger firms will do basically for you. And so basically what you're saying is, well, I'm not big enough to get, Clio or Rocket Matter to, to stop what they're doing and engage me in a massive security risk assessment project. They're not going to do that for me, but they'll do it for a great big global law firm. They'll
Right.
do it for a global banking system. And if you have terms and conditions that say that you get all the security protections that they get, then you're sort of piggybacking on their requirements back down to the different vendors that you have. So that's why I always say, don't use the free version of stuff like Box and Dropbox and LastPass in association with your business data. When you're holding as a custodian, you're holding data for a customer of yours, then you're a business and you sort of owe it to them to use business class, protections and software to do that. This is another, and we're just trying to unpack different lessons that we're learning from
Right.
this incident.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. Just as a general principle, that's always, sort of been my position. As an attorney, you're a business. You should operate as a business, and businesses have to spend money to do things the way they should. And whether it's protecting your client's information or storing your data or whatever it is that you're doing, that will cost you money. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and wildly spend money like you're on some sort of drunken spending spree or something. But, I run into attorneys all the time who, for their business, use a free email service. Whether that's from Google or Yahoo, or I still run into them who are using AOL. And, I look at that and I'm like, if you can't afford to pay the $5 a month that Microsoft or Google is going to charge you to get a business email address, then you have a serious problem with your business. And I understand in a small firm, literally every dollar that goes out the door is a dollar that's not going into your pocket. But you do have to spend some of those dollars to be an actual business. So I'm with you that there are times you need to be paying people to use their services. It's one thing if you just want to skate by on the free stuff. For your personal stuff unrelated to your business, that's a decision you're free to make. But when it comes to business, you really should be using business class services. That's my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, it costs money to do these things, on the part of your vendors. They have to spend more money in terms of security consulting fees and the different appliances and security software and monitoring systems that are necessary to create a secure environment. And I don't know why you would expect to get all those benefits from a free service when right next to it is a business class service that obviously is going to be subject to more auditing. And from their perspective, if you put yourself into their shoes as a vendor and that your business class customers are going to require, SOC 2 reports and ISO 27000, compliance certificates and they want to do audits and they have a right to request copies of security risk assessments, well, you're going to limit the number of accounts that get those benefits, and you're going to limit it to the paying business class customers. One other point I want to make. This is a little off the current topic, but it's attached to the general idea that this March 1st notice from LastPass is supposed to be giving us not just an update on what they found, the latest information that they found, but a list of recommended actions. And I think those recommended actions are fine. It would have been great to do in July of last year. But none of the recommendations that they're putting out are any good to help you, dig out of the situation that they've put you in. The only thing that you can really do there is change the LastPass master password in every single password that you had stored in LastPass, because upping the iteration count, for example, doesn't radio out into the world wherever your offline copy of your vault is and re-encrypt it with a new iteration count. Changing your LastPass master password doesn't do that either. Out there somewhere is a vault, and it is protected with whatever you had in place on the date of the last incident, which I think at this point looks like it was around the end of August. And so, accounts that got set up in September going forward don't seem to be affected by this incident, but everything that happened prior to that would be. And so the offline copy of your vault that's in the hands of the threat actor is protected with whatever password was in place at the time, whatever iteration count was in place at the time, and two-factor authentication has nothing to do with this because the vault is already outside the apparatus that is protected by two-factor authentication. So I know we made that clear in our last episode, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that these recommendations from LastPass are prospective, with the possible exception of turning on the dark web monitoring, because then at least that might alert you to a possibility that one of the accounts that is in your vault is now breached, from the accessibility of the vault. That could help.
Right. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And I know the last time, I think your suggestion was, and this makes sense to me, is that by the end of the first quarter, which is rapidly approaching, that we should have, gone in and changed our at least the important passwords. And by that, I mean the ones that, provide access to things like banking, or if you're an attorney, practice management, or, the other places where you're storing, file storage services, Dropbox, or whatever it is that you use for that you go through and change those, sort of prioritizing the stuff that has more sensitive data first. I think it makes sense, but to change those going forward, and I think that makes sense. And one of the things I think they mentioned in the update as well, that LastPass, and I'm sure other services do this as well, they'll run an analysis of your passwords and tell you when you have
Yeah.
one that sucks. And
give you a
and
security score, like a big picture
yes,
score. That's nice. It's
yeah,
kind of fun to do, really.
it is fun to do, and it's fun to do it and then go change some of the things that they suggest you change,
Yeah.
and then run
See
it
how
again to
high.
see if your score got better.
Yeah. See how high
Yeah.
of a score you can get. Right.
But that's definitely worth doing. And I've noticed as well, and I presume this is an across the board feature that's either been implemented or at least has become more noticeable to me, is if you try to reuse a password, you get a notice. Now, I wasn't intentionally trying to reuse a password, but I was trying to save a new entry, and it ended up I saved it twice. So I ended up with a duplicate entry,
Right.
and LastPass said, "Hey, you're reusing the same password." I was like, well, okay, yes, I suppose from a technical sense, but that was an error. So I was able to go in and delete one of the entries and save the one I wanted, because I had one in a shared folder and one outside of a shared folder. Uh, so I went and deleted the duplicate. But that's a benefit, so that if you are one of those people who, at least in the past, tended to reuse passwords, LastPass will yell at you about that now. So I
Yeah.
think that's good.
Yeah. And it kind of, you don't have to get kind of crazy about it. Like your example makes perfect sense. And it's sort of like what you're really trying to do is keep the, sort of the realms of autonomy independent from one another. And, in one of the environments that I manage, we just ran one of these phishing tests today, actually. And you send out a message, and everybody gets an email, and it invites them to click here. Something wrong with your Microsoft account or something like that. and you click here, and we went through it, and you click on the button, and it brings you to a Microsoft login page that looks perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Except the URL, if you catch that, I think it's mcsharepoint.com. So you can kind of you kind of know that it's, Microsoft has a
Right.
list of domains that they own for this purpose. But otherwise, it looks awfully real. And so you put in your username, and then it says, okay, click next. And then you put in your password, and you click next. And then the next thing you get is, oh, you've been phished by your security team. But don't worry, we're all human. And then it gives them a little training thing. But it's a nice thing. It's a nice exercise to go through, because you can kind of hands-on see, oh, okay, well, if I had done this in real life, now somebody would have my username and my password. And then hopefully you can kind of show a demo or something where you would say, okay, now here's the password spray program. In fact, if you Google that password spray program, do Google image search for password spray program, you'll see the like the graphical user interface for what these are. And if you kind of picture it, it's like a grid, like 10 by 10 grid that shows a login mechanism for, sort of all the major things. Like there's one for Google, there's one for Facebook, there's one for Apple, there's one for everything. Chase, First, Fifth Third Bank, whatever. And you can set it up any way you want. Like they're highly customizable. They have customer support and everything. But this is a password spray program, and you can say, I just phished this username and password, run it through all 100 of these accounts. And if you're using the same password everywhere, the same username and password everywhere, then it's going to start lighting up green. I'm in their Facebook account, I'm in their Gmail account. And once you're in those accounts, you can start, then you change the password, you get elevated administrative access to a lot of other things. Like your Gmail account is often the key to change the password to your bank account, for example. And
Right.
so, and you can kind of see a flow chart for a hacker. Is okay, here's your list of priorities. First, get the email accounts, then change the bank accounts, and then get access to Verizon, whatever. There's an order of operations here. So that's what we're talking about. We want, if you accidentally get phished on one system, that it's pretty much limited to things that are associated with that one system.
That all makes sense, and I think is a lot of information for us to think about going forward. I really like the point you made about how that's difficult for a lot of us as solos or small firms to uh, do this sort of proactive work that you get from IT departments. But I do think there's something that we can do that is really easy to implement, and you mentioned it earlier, which is the account that you use on, to use your computer shouldn't have administrative rights. Like
Yeah.
that does that preclude you from installing software on your computer? No, because you could always log in with the account that has it, but it does make you think about it. You're not just going to accidentally install something, which is actually fairly easy to do. I used to help an organization um, do their, you know, deal with their computers. And there was a secretary there who, I swear, every time I logged into her computer, her web browser had gained another toolbar that was completely useless. But, she was down to having like 3 square inches to be able to surf the web, because every place she went said, oh, you need to install this and you need to install that. And she kept installing stuff. And I had to turn that off so it wouldn't happen anymore. But that's something we can do to ourselves or our employees. And again, uh, this isn't a lockdown like an IT department can do. You can work your way around it by logging in under the administrator account, but it is something that's just an extra step, I think, to help protect us.
Yeah. Yeah. Those kind of basic things. It's kind of funny that when people say, I got hacked. I'll see this like on social media where somebody will post, sorry if I sent you a weird message, I got hacked. And I'm thinking, did you get hacked? I mean, is that really, are we giving too much credit to the person who got your password? I mean, like if you print your username and password on a billboard in the middle of town, are you being hacked? Is that what
Right.
that's called? You're just sort of handing that information out a lot of times. The point being that we can practice some basic personal hygiene here, basic computer hygiene anyway, that goes a whole long way. And now that I'm saying that, I do have a basic computer security checklist that if I think about it, maybe we could put a link to that in the liner notes for the show and people could
Okay.
download that. Yeah, because that kind of goes through. Some people might say it's overkill, but like it's even if you just implement the things that are easy for you to do, every little thing that you add to your to your security program is one less thing that you have to worry about. So it's kind of worth it.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. Uh, we're, I think, about to go a little long here, so this is probably a good time for to stop so people can think about how it is that they're operating and what steps that they can take to make themselves more secure. And the one thing I do want to point out um, that I think is applicable to, sort of a security in general for you and your firm, as well as for other things as well. Putting new processes in place in your firm, and that is, it's a process. You don't go from today you're at your current state of security and tomorrow you're Fort Knox. It doesn't work that way. You take steps, um, and that could be changing one or two passwords a day to make them more secure and make them different from what they were when LastPass was breached. And before long, if you're doing that every day consistently, at the end of the month, you've changed a bunch of passwords, 60 passwords or so, if you just do two a day. But if you sat down tonight and went through and tried to do 60 password changes, you get frustrated really quickly. So I think it's important to recognize this is a process. Take it step by step, and small steps are fine. You don't have to solve everything overnight. It would be great if we could, but that's just, we're human. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and that also makes the whole idea of it seem sort of less daunting. We always have that where if I say, okay, you've got this massive project that you have to do, and it's got 5,000 steps, and you don't even want to get started. But if I say, okay, I need you to do 3 things today, and it's sort of chunking it down and making it more of a conceivable project, and talking about it the way you are, saying, well, no, we're not going to do a project. We're just going to begin a process, and we're going to keep the process going and sort of make it a lifestyle. That is a much more palatable and sort of comprehensible approach to this.
Yeah, it's something that we can all do. It's all achievable. That the other isn't, and we do this, and in the law all the time. Like if we're writing a brief, the project isn't write brief. you know, we start. Okay, we need to put together a statement of facts, or we need to review the depositions, or whatever it is. And again, even that is too much. You don't review the depositions. You review the deposition of witness X. Like, there's your task, and if you get it done, then you can go to the next witness or go back and look at interrogatories or whatever it is that you need to do. But it's not like, if it's one giant task, you'll never get it done. Break it down into manageable chunks, put a couple of them on your to-do list and do them. And that applies to security the same it does to anything else.
Yep,
So
that's good advice.
this is probably a good place to wrap up then. So thank you for joining us. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions for our topics for us to cover or whatever else, send us an email at info@theconnectedlawyer.com. I'm Bryan.
I'm Aaron. We'll see you next time.